Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elisa Baselt, and I'm the Chief Learning Officer at the Canadian Physiotherapy Association. I will be moderating today's session. This afternoon, we will take a look at the patient experience in a COVID-19 world. During this session, we will hear from Ryan Hughes and Nicole Stanhope from the T1 Agency, a Toronto-based agency focused on building consumer experiences. They will be joined by Chrissy Murphy, the CPA's Chief Marketing and Membership Officer. If you have a question for our panelists, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to address your questions throughout the session. In addition, we will be recording today's webinar, and it will be made available on CPA's COVID-19 website. I would now like to introduce our speakers. Nicole Stanhope brings a diverse background to the strategy group at T1. Across almost a decade of agency experience, she has worked in account management, media, and creative operations before finding her home in the T1 strategy group. She's a passionate consumer strategist and data junkie. Nicole is a holistic thinker with a keen sense of human behavior and the ability to spot the next big thing. Ryan Hughes is the Senior Director of Strategy at T1, and he is a proven business manager with experience building strategic plans for some of the world's leading brands. Through a decade of client-side experience, he worked on businesses that were both locally and internationally managed, and in a variety of sectors, including health science. His strong understanding of business, operational, and consumer strategies lends a unique perspective and an ability to quickly and intuitively distill insights into actionable plans. I'm now going to turn it over to Chrissy to begin the presentation.
Hey everybody, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Chrissy. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at the CPA. We're super excited to bring you guys this presentation today and give you a little bit of a behind the scenes look at some of the work we've been doing in consumer insights. I don't know, Ryan, if you want to pull up the deck, I'll just kick right off and talk a little bit about the origins of this project before we get into the results. My goal is to speak as little as possible today and let the experts talk about things, but I do want to give you guys some context about why this project has happened and why it's important to the CPA and kind of where everything started from. I've been at the CPA in the Chief Marketing and Membership Officer role for just over a year. I actually celebrated my 1 year with the kickoff of COVID right in that March-April period. So it's been an exciting year of preparation for how are we going to deal with this. When I came to the CPA, they had recently done, JP, the CEO, had recently done some research with the members and with a number of our stakeholders about what the things were that our membership were looking for from the CPA. Guided by the board, a lot of our stakeholders, the divisions, the branches, there was quite unanimous consent. We needed to be doing something to talk to Canada, talk to consumers, and really get some traction with the public. But that's about where the consensus ended. What we were trying to say, what we thought Canadians thought, are we trying to influence behavior? What were the key messages? It depended who you asked, what setting they worked in, what province they were in. Everybody had a really different perspective on where to go. And we didn't have good, solid data where we could go and create a truly public-facing campaign. You just want to skip ahead, Ryan? So we developed a plan for 2020 that was all about how do we get market research. There is kind of a big deal that's happening this year, although it hasn't maybe gotten the love that we originally thought it would. It is obviously the 100th anniversary of the association this year. So what we thought was, we're going to go out with our 100th anniversary marketing. We know that we have some really strong messages about our history and about the role we've played in the last 100 years. And behind the scenes, while we're talking about the 100th anniversary, we're going to go look at what Canada thinks. So we were going to do some qualitative analysis, psychoanalytic studies, quantitative studies, and build out some really sound consumer strategies with T1. So we started that project in January of this year. We started to work through the qualitative analysis. We got our 100th anniversary campaign out into the market. And the intention was always, okay, in 2021, we're going to do a really big intentional consumer marketing campaign in 2021, following the success of our 100th anniversary and really founded in some solid consumer research. And then, like everybody knows, kind of COVID hit. You can just skip ahead, Ryan. And so what we had to do was we had to pivot really fast. We had to be nimble, be flexible, leverage the research we were able to do in January, February, and the beginning of March, and use that to get into the market while people were talking about healthcare. For us, just demonstrating the diverse role that physio plays, the critical role we play in rehab, rehabilitation during and post-COVID was really important. But also supporting our advocacy messages. Our advocacy messages are really strong. We're working really hard with the Government of Canada. So we really wanted to create a base from which we could start to get people talking about physiotherapy in the same frame of recovery. So we were 1/3 of the way through the market research project when I called Nicole and Ryan and said, okay, we need to stop. We need to figure out how we're going to make this fit. And we're really excited about the work we've been able to do in a very short period of time with T1 on making that research mean something, really lean into some of the recovery language that we heard from our consumers, which I'm excited for T1 to tell you about, and to really strengthen the message with the intention, of course, of continuing our market research in the future, but leveraging what we had right now to make an impact in the moment. So that's kind of where the project came from. I want to start off by saying we're really fortunate to have really great partners at T1. Ryan, Nicole, Brian, Zoe, Carolyn, they've all been amazing working with us through the creative and a lot of phone calls from me going, how fast can we get this out? So really excited for them to tell you about where this kind of all came from and what we can learn from the research we've done so far as we look forward to patients coming back into clinic. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to pass it over to Ryan and Nicole and let them take you through the project.
Great. Thank you, Christy. I'll apologize in advance if my bandwidth isn't up to snuff today and I glitch a bit. I apologize. That's why I've hidden my video, but you're not missing much. Don't worry. I want to thank Christy first off and everybody who's joined the webinar today. For me personally, it's been a real privilege to actually work on this project. I almost 6 years ago was in a pretty serious accident and worked for 3+ years with a physiotherapist. And through that experience, the recovery that I was able to appreciate, but even just seeing her write angry emails to insurance companies on my behalf, even writing letters to surgeons who left me with a 7-inch scar and she thought it should have only been like 2. Had a really positive experience with physiotherapy. So to be able to work online today is a great privilege. So I've had a very positive perception, very positive time with physiotherapy. Our first question that we really wanted to understand was, how about every other Canadian? What does the general average consumer out there think about physiotherapy? Good news, I'm not alone. Overall, regardless of whether or not somebody's used physiotherapy or is a non-user of physiotherapy, a very, very positive perception of what a physiotherapist is and the work that you guys do. You'll see images throughout the presentation today. If they look like a collage, that's from a consumer. So the one on the right here is what a consumer feels represents visually what a physiotherapist is all about. And you can see it's about pain relief, recovery, regaining mobility. And that was really kind of the core understanding that consumers had of physiotherapy. One of the exercises that we also did through the research to help us understand how people view they did was a sorting exercise where we asked them to sort physiotherapy along with a bunch of other similar disciplines on a couple of different spectrums. And physiotherapy did really well again. So the first spectrum we asked people to look at was medically based. How medically based did they feel physiotherapy and a couple other similar or adjacent disciplines were? Consumers saw physiotherapy as the most medically based discipline of the set that we looked at. And it was a fairly comprehensive competitive set, even included personal trainers there. Second spectrum we asked them to look at was, is physiotherapy and the others in that set about short-term or long-term treatment? And physio and kinesiology came out on top as this is a really long-term solution. It's about fixing a problem for the long term and over a course of period of time. That's really important for us to remember. And we're going to talk about that a little bit further in the presentation today.
Yeah, I think one thing to add, Ryan, to that is that not all of the professions that we asked about when we talked about what is medical and where does physiotherapy fit in medicine and what is the duration of treatment are listed on this slide. We just used the ones that we thought were indicative, but there were other professions, physicians, psychologists, other professions a little bit less related to physiotherapy, just so we could see where we fit within the broader spectrum of all of the different healthcare professions.
Mm-hmm.
But if anything was higher ranking than physiotherapy, it will be on these slides. So we're not skewing any data here. So the next two spectrums that we looked at was trustworthiness. And again, physiotherapy came out on top, the most trustworthy of the disciplines that we looked at. Now, there's probably a very strong correlation between the trustworthiness and the medically basedness of the discipline of physiotherapy. And the last one we looked at was effectiveness. And again, physiotherapy is on top. So there's a clear trend, guys. Physiotherapy has a very positive perception amongst Canadian consumers. And this effectiveness is probably also very much related to that long-term nature and long-term understanding that consumers have of physiotherapy. It's not something that they go and feel great for the next day. They understand it's a journey, it's a process that will take time, but ultimately is the right solution to help eliminate pain. And that's an important story that you'll see later on as we start to dissect what this all means. So if you're not feeling great, you should be. Physiotherapists and what the work you guys do is viewed very, very positively by Canadians, and you make a really key impact in their life. That's not good enough for us, though. We really wanted to understand the why behind this positivity. So we leveraged a technique, and this is me nerding out a bit, I apologize, called psychoanalytics. And what psychoanalytics is all about is to behind what a consumer tells you they think. So consumers told us they love physiotherapy, but we want to understand the why. And psychoanalytics is about going really deep into the psyche of a consumer to find that why. What we learned through this process was that, the strength of physiotherapy, the positive perception of physiotherapy comes because you're able to address really 4 key parts of how a consumer thinks and do this in very distinct and ownable and positive ways. We start with the material need. This is the most conscious form of decision making. It's very rational. So this is easy for a consumer to talk to us about. For the material need, there's kind of two spectrums that we saw in the research. The first is pain. We know that people come to physiotherapy because they're feeling pain. It's not this mild, temperate discomfort that they may feel. It's usually ongoing that impacts their quality of life. So the higher the pain level, the more likely they are to pursue physiotherapy and to get a doctor's recommendation. The second spectrum that we saw was ease and accessibility. And, I'm sure all of you guys are very familiar with accessibility as a term, and the consumer talked to us about this. So, on the low end of this spectrum, a doctor doesn't recommend it. But on the high end, the people who are pursuing it, there's a doctor recommendation and they could get to a clinic and insurance pays for it. Insurance is key. The consumer has told us that, and we know that the CPAs and organizations keenly aware of them. You've got 2 spectrums. What better way to lay it out than a quadrant? So what we see obviously is we want to be playing in that top right-hand corner. That's where our consumers got pain and they've got access, and it's easy for them to access physiotherapy. Those are the people who are coming to your clinic today and where you're having the most level of success. The people who are on the top left quadrant, they're feeling pain, but access is probably not as easy for them, so they aren't seeking physiotherapy. This is an opportunity for telehealth. I think this is probably what we've seen through COVID-19, where people are still in need of physiotherapy, but physically can't get to the office. That's where people are in that quadrant there. The bottom right-hand one.
One interesting piece, sorry, Ryan, about that,
Oh.
that I thought the members might be super interested in is when we talk a lot about access at the CPA, we talk about, my insurance won't pay for it. But one of the biggest things that we heard was like, I physically cannot get to this clinic. It doesn't have good parking. It's too far away from the bus stop. I'm sore, so I can't walk from the bus to the clinic. So access to the consumer, where we think of access, and we obviously at the CPA are working really hard on access to the consumer wasn't as complicated as getting insurance coverage. For a lot of them, it was, I would go, but I can't physically get there from where the location of the clinic is. So that was a really interesting key learning for me, was the consumer's view of access was far less complicated than the CPA view of access and all of the different things that we're working towards.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. And I think even one of the things we'll talk about later on as well is the change in reality because of COVID-19, this physical than ever. So just really quickly before we move on, that bottom right-hand quadrant, those are people who have access to physiotherapy, but they don't really have a need. And this is where it gets a little bit risky. If we try to focus on this patient, we start to run the risk of changing the core of physiotherapy as we try to get people to come in and benefit from physiotherapy who don't necessarily have the traditional need for it. And just building off of what Christy said again, here's one of these horrible illustrations from a consumer of what these barriers, this inaccessibility to physiotherapy looks and feels like. And as Christy pointed out, it goes beyond insurance. Insurance is key, but we've heard this geographic thing as well. And from my own personal experience, I can definitely relate. I had a car accident. I didn't have a vehicle. I would have to take public transit or walk to visit my physiotherapist. So I ended up going to the clinic that was minutes from my house, simply because it was accessible. That's why I chose that clinic. So accessibility to things, insurance, as well as physical access to a clinic. So that's material need. That's the conscious need. That's something that a consumer can easily talk to us about. It's a very rational part of their decision making and why they view so positively physiotherapy. The second level that we start to now peel away the layers of the human brain is the ego need. The ego need is all about what's in it for me. What do I get out of physiotherapy? What was really interesting, and this really surprised me, I don't know if it will surprise anyone on the webinar, is it's not about 100%. It's about getting almost as good as you were before whatever it was that triggered the need for physiotherapy. Maybe it's a car accident or a sports injury or even repetitive strain. When the patient comes to you, they don't expect like they were before. They acknowledge that it's about being almost as good. They want to be able to do what they did in life before this incident that led them to the ultimate need for physiotherapy. And I apologize if you get sick and tired of me using my personal example, but for me, that was being able to walk 18 holes of golf. It wasn't about breaking 80 or 90 even some days. It was simply being able to go out and enjoy golf again. That was good enough for me. And when I was able to do that, got a huge high five and massive smile from my physiotherapist. But that's what it's about. It's not about being whole. It's about being able to enjoy life the way you did before, which doesn't mean being as good. So that's the ego need. And that's what they get out of physiotherapy. The next level, peeling away another piece of the human brain, is the social need. And this is where we start to get, at the bottom of this pyramid, really powerful understanding of and deeper subconscious in the human understanding. The social need of physiotherapy is all about the physiotherapist and their role as a healer. So what was crystal clear to us across all the groups is it's your hands that heal. It's the physiotherapist's touch that heals. It's not technology, and it's not tools, and it's definitely not machinery. What we saw was this social connection that gets created between the physiotherapist and the patient through, the gentle manipulation, the examination through touch, even the assignment of homework and exercise to be done at home. This is all super tangible, hands-on, human-to-human connection, and that's really important. Where we saw this kind of not play out was the overuse of devices, especially if a physiotherapist were to hook somebody up to some, still that human connection falls completely apart, and no longer are you the healer, but that machine and the device is. And it's the power of your healing hands that really creates this deep social connection between you and your patient.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in on this one because I know for a lot of our clinicians, those tools are really important parts of practice and a part of treatment. And we're a group of marketers. We're definitely not, we're not the college, and we're definitely not educators when it comes to physiotherapy. But I think what we can learn from this is understanding the perception of the consumer and the patient when we're using those tools, either in the way that we're having our conversations or the way that we're interacting with them. Knowing what they're telling us from the research can help guide us in how we can use those tools in a way that's more tangible. Obviously, we learned about this in March, and then in March 15th, everybody started to roll out telehealth, and I was sitting over here stressing, going, oh my God, they just told us how important touching was. We just did groups all February to hear about how important touch was. So I don't want to take away the validity of innovating the practice, but I think there's some really interesting articles. I know there was one released just recently, we've shared on our Twitter account, about, what is the changing face of physiotherapy and how are we distinguishing who we are, and making sure that the true skill and the education is supporting these clinical tasks and treatments that you guys have and are registered and licensed to provide. So I just want to make that distinction, is that we need to really lean into what the consumer or the patient is thinking. And we also need to make the best decision for our patients based on who we are as physiotherapists. So that's just a little CPA caveat for you.
Yeah, and I think that's key, right? And he said, and they're definitely not scientists that we interviewed, definitely not doctors. If you heard some of the shit they said, you would know that they were far from. But they're consumers, and that's what matters. Again, another visual representation. You could see here that when we asked them to represent what physiotherapy is all about, every single one of these photos, and these are two different collages, two different consumers, is touching. I'm also kind of shocked at how much stock photography there is of physiotherapy available online for these collages. But tons of touch. This is how they see that human connection. Our last level, the most deep level of connection and understanding of a consumer of physiotherapy, is what we call the archetypal. And this is what meaning does physiotherapy provide to consumer in their life? And this is the most motivating level. And it's all about connecting consumers to their body. And I know for some of us, but this is what the consumer is telling us you really give them and the value you add back to their life. We saw this far more in English Canada than we did in Quebec, Canada. So in English Canada, there's this real disconnect between people and the signals of their body. We didn't see this as much in Quebec. Maybe it's the joie de vivre, but it's very prominent in the rest of the country. And it's this almost ignoring of these little signals that our body tells us we aren't as in tune. We don't listen to them. We don't understand what they mean. It's maybe sitting over these days, hunched over a kitchen table, plugging away on a laptop for a few hours. And what physiotherapy does in connecting people to their bodies is it allows us to understand these signals. It allows us to recognize what they're saying to us. But more importantly, physiotherapists arms us with the tools and the exercises and the resources to respond to that signal from our body. And that's really important because it's not just this is what your body's saying, but it's also this is how you address that pain in an ongoing way. I haven't seen my physiotherapist in probably 2 years, and I still do neuroflossing. When my neck, my arms get tight, I'm neuroflossing endorphins. That's a tool. I'm listening to my body. And this is really the most powerful thing that we saw that physiotherapy does. And at the end of the day, it really stems from all the different pieces that you practice and all the different interactions that you have with your consumer is this really powerful resource for them to connect with their bodies.
And when we think about telerehab, this
so we piece it all together.
Sorry, Ryan. Just quickly, when we think about telerehab, the disconnect from touch is this education. And I know we're hearing from our members, I can still educate, I can still inform, I can still visually assess you by through telerehabilitation. And so that education piece is something that the consumer is finding really true value in, and it's informing the way that they live their lives. So it does ensure that part of practice, in adjusted practice, still has a lot of relevance with the consumer, even though we can't be hands-on.
Something else that I don't want to get lost on, part of the social need, is definitely this hands-on touch factor, but it's also that the physiotherapist is treating them like a human being, and they're asking questions and they're answering questions, and they really explain things, and they treat you like an individual, and they give you this kind of personalized plan. That's such an important part of the social need as well. So it kind of goes hand in hand with touch, is that at the basic social level, people just want to be treated like individual human beings. And so that's still available to us for sure.
Mm-hmm. So it's just a quick summary of the various different needs that we hit. And it's the fact that, physiotherapy spans from the material to the archetypal need. That is really why, at the end of the day, it's seen so positively across all the different spectrums, all the different ways we look at it. It is a really unique little piece of digging that we did to find all these different levels. But what does that actually look like? How does that come to life? So this is what's living deep in the minds of your patients. They don't even know this is there. But what they see is, at the start, you playing 5 key roles for them. The first one is you're a coach. Nicole was just talking to, right? You're personally coaching them through this journey. You're holding them accountable. You're giving them techniques. You're giving them the homework exercises. And they're coming back. They're asking, did you do your exercises? How's that going? You're also their cheerleader. You're there for them when they make the progress. You're there high-fiving. You're sharing in that recovery journey with your patient. You're a student, constantly learning, but not just for your own edification. It's about new ways of engaging with your patient, new ways of discovering the root causes for their pains and issues. And that is very appreciated by your patients. Your doctors, right? You're understanding the patient's medical history, you're understanding their past and what could be the various contributing factors. You're diagnosing, very medical there. And then my favorite one is you're a team member, right? And you're in this journey together. Remember, physiotherapy is a relationship that goes on for years. And because of that, you're involved with your patient on this journey of recovery. You're a team, you're a unit working together. And that's really powerful, creates a very meaningful relationship. That, even through telehealth and you're able to bring that to life. You're able to bring a lot of these components to life through telehealth, and definitely still in the new world of PPE in your clinics. The second thing that we looked at and how this comes to life is what's that successful relationship look like? And Nicole touched on a bit of this, but there's the hands-on component, but it's about personalization, right? You're not writing a prescription for a drug to lower somebody's blood pressure. You're diagnosing them. You're working to understand their movements, their bodies, to help improve their pain and specific injuries. It's very personalized. Education, again, educating yourself, but also educating exercises and helping them connect with their body. The FaceTime, making sure that, if you're in a clinic with multiple physiotherapists and some support staff, that they're seeing the lead physiotherapist, that they're feeling important, that they're feeling that personally them are important to the physiotherapist. Not rushing, making sure follow-ups. This was interesting. We actually heard from a lot of people that when their physiotherapists reached out between appointments to see how they were doing and check in on their progress, they loved that. And, a lot of the research we do with consumers, it's like, yeah, you know, I don't want the car dealership to call me 3 times after my oil change to see how it went. Just leave me alone. It's not transactional. Again, you're team members. You're in this process together. You're a coach, a cheerleader. They actually really want to hear from you. And again, that's important. In this time where we're distant and we can't necessarily have that same relationship, you can email, you can reach out and continue that. Another thing that we saw, and this isn't something that we necessarily started to go after at the outset of the project, but something that came up very organically through conversation with consumers, is they have a very particular expected environment to walk into. And it's kind of this blend between a doctor's office and the gym, right? They definitely don't want their physiotherapist to show up in a suit and tie and lab coat, but they don't want you showing up in shorts and a tank top, right? It's that Lululemon. It's that ability to be physical, to be active. They expect their environment to have some exercise equipment, you know, medicine balls. They expect kettlebells and even workout equipment there, because it is about this physical journey, this physical movement. And then obviously relatively easy to get to. You'll see this come up time and time again, that the actual physical location, things that we'll also address later on with some tips. So if I had to sum it all up, you know, we did tons of research. There's a lot more that we haven't included in here. But at the end of the day, if somebody asks me what's somebody looking for from the physiotherapist, it's a coach, right? They're looking for somebody to really help teach them how to connect with their body. It's those signals that they're looking to understand. They do want to speed up healing. They're not expecting to get back to 100%. They just want to be able to do life the way they did before. And accessibility, both through insurance, but also very importantly, geographically as well. The clinic needs to be accessible to this patient. So I don't know if you want to pause. I don't know, Lisa, if you have any questions at this point we want to answer before we jump into some of the changes and recommendations that we have.
Okay, let's keep going.
Great. So I'll actually hand it over to Nicole.
Perfect.
Some of our understanding and interpretation of what's happened in the past year.
Perfect. Thank you. So now that we have a good understanding of what the patient expects from physiotherapy, why they love physiotherapy, we kind of have to take that and then understand what is the impact that COVID-19 has had on that experience, and what is the impact it's going to have on that experience moving forward. So the only really thing we've been studying COVID-19, we've been studying consumer behavior for months at our agency, and the only thing that we're really sure about is that there's no guidebook to this. There's no benchmark. We've never faced this before. This is so new and crazy for everyone. So we have to figure out what are consumers feeling right now in order to make decisions about how to take our businesses and your businesses and your clinics moving forward. So we're going to look at the impact of COVID-19 on your consumer's life through 4 different types of security that is being threatened right now. So we're going to look at the economic security, which is threats to any type of financial security that people are having, their jobs, their benefits, things like that. We're going to look at the emotional security. So this is like stresses on people's life, threats to overall mental health and self-esteem. We're going to look at physical security, which is your basic physiological human needs. These are threats to things like accessing food, your safety, and your health. And then we're going to look at social security. So these are threats to social connections, threats to your connection with your family, your friends, your relationships. Jump ahead, right? Thank you. So the economic impact of COVID-19 is undoubtedly felt among Canadians all over the country, with 1 in 5 Canadian companies having laid off 80% or more of their staff and 7.5 million Canadians applying for the CERB. This is felt among everyone. And for people who haven't been laid off, they are facing potential salary cuts. People that have been laid off no longer have their benefits. So if we look at what was so important for accessing physiotherapy to the consumers from the research, some of those things are being taken away. A lot of people are being forced to build up emergency funds and use their funds sparingly. So not a lot of people might have spare money that they could use to pay for a service like physiotherapy. So it's just something to consider as an impact on their behavior as we think about moving forward. There's no doubt that people are scared about their health right now. So the threats to people's health safety is something that is so real for everyone, and no one has really faced these types of threats before in their lifetime. So we're seeing that 77% of Canadians are deeply concerned about their personal health, and these numbers have stayed relatively stagnant since COVID hit a couple months ago. 88% of people are going outside with all of their protective gear, and they're staying socially distant. So this is something that might impact someone's level of comfortability when they're considering going back and visiting their physiotherapist. They just might not be comfortable yet if they're still very scared about their health and safety. Isolation for many people has negatively impacted their social safety. So a lot of people have had to adjust to just social connections, connecting with their family, connecting with their friends. They have to do Zoom calls and virtual hangouts, stuff like that. But we're not seeing that people are still feeling very connected socially despite having all of those tools, which is a very a sad reality. So we're seeing that only 28% of Canadians are feeling very connected to their friends, and 33% are feeling very connected to their families that live outside of their household during the pandemic. So people are just feeling really lonely, isolated. So what we can assume from this moving forward is that people are going to potentially be excited to be allowed to leave their home, be allowed to come and see their physiotherapist or their friends or their family when the restrictions are lifted. So that's something just to keep in mind when you reopen. And then all those factors, the health and safety, the financial, and the social connections, all kind of come at our mental health. And this is our emotional safety. And we're seeing in Canada that our mental health levels are at an all-time low. And we're kind of approaching this crisis territory. So when you open up your clinic and you get people coming back in, understanding that physiotherapists, for a lot of people, they feed that social kind of need. Don't be afraid if, someone, when they come back to see you, they want to unload some of this stuff, or they want to have a conversation, or when you ask them how they're doing, they might want to talk about more than just their physical pain, because you might be the first person that this person has got to interact with in the last couple months, because we know a lot of people are isolating completely alone. So there's just something to look for. People are not wanting to be in this situation. People are looking to improve and get better. So they're going to take advantages of these situations to kind of improve their overall health during this time. So what can we understand about all of these different consumer insights and behaviors? What can we take from understanding how consumers think about physiotherapy and how their behavior could potentially be impacted by COVID-19? And moving forward, making sure that we can maintain that patient experience that you have when you start to re-engage with people. So we're going to start with some tips and tricks for you guys on how to kind of eliminate some of these barriers for people and make people feel more safe and comfortable. One of the biggest barriers that we talked about up front in the research was accessibility, and that can take so many different forms. So we need to consider things like the financial status of a lot of the different patients. A lot of people don't have their benefits anymore, and a lot of in their insurance, and a lot of people don't have extra cash to spend on something like this. Something as simple as people are not engaging or kind of like navigating through their cities or towns anymore the way that they did before the pandemic hit. So someone might not be very comfortable to hop on public transit, for example, to come and see their physiotherapist. What are the things that we can do to make them feel more comfortable or to eliminate some of those barriers? So we're going to talk about the most important ones and how we feel like we can help overcome them.
Can I jump in, Nicole?
Yeah.
I want to just, before we get into, as we get into recommendations, remind all of the physiotherapists and physiotherapy assistants and rehabilitation therapists who are on the call that for guidance, this is coming from what is the consumer told marketers versus what are the guidelines coming from your college, what are the guidelines coming from your employer, the things you can and can't impact. For us, I know, I speak with Barb and Lisa on our advocacy team on a daily basis about how do we get more money in the pockets of physiotherapists? How are we going to increase the access to rehabilitation? We see the looming elective surgeries are coming within days. And we see this big kind of horizon of financial implications on physiotherapists. So I just want to make sure that at this point in the presentation, we reset and we remember that this is the things from the reflections of the consumer and the information the consumer has told us, and that those physiotherapy specific realities and the things that are going to impact your abilities to take some of this advice, we're very aware of those and working on those really hard. So I want to make sure that you guys have that lens is, based on what the consumer is telling us, here are some things that we can implement or you can consider as you reopen.
Mm-hmm. It's very important when we're doing research and understanding how consumers think to always be going with what they think and not trying to kind of reverse it and go against it, because we know that that's never going to work. So these are just tips and tricks to kind of take what we know about how the consumers think about physiotherapy and really work with them so that they can work to your advantage. So the first is just to talk to your patients. The patients told us that they love to hear from you and they love to talk to you. So this is an opportunity to reach out to them and say, how are you? And maybe just bring attention to some of that pain. So we know from the research that the number one of the biggest triggers to go see a physiotherapist is that pain. And a lot of people, especially the English-speaking Canadians, are not always aware of these cues and they're not always attuned to them. So it's an opportunity to say, hey, I know you've been working at your kitchen table. How's your back feeling? How are you doing? How is that, previous injury that we had been working on, and how is this working from home or staying at home been impacting that? And it's just a way to tell them your clinic is open and we are here for you when you need it. So really don't be shy to just reach out and start those conversations. Something that we have heard some amazing stories from you guys through Chrissy and Elisa is the successes that you've been seeing through telehealth and your shift to telehealth. So what we want to do is, knowing that one of the biggest barriers is actually getting to a clinic and people might not feel safe still to actually come into your clinic and be in those close quarters with you. How can you continue to encourage people to use telehealth that have already been using it, or introduce it to maybe some new patients that are feeling some of that new pain we've been talking about? And then one of the bigger misconceptions about seeing a physiotherapist that we heard through the research, which surprised us, was that people assume that you need a doctor's referral to come and see a physiotherapist, which we know is not always the case. So remind people that you can come to my clinic and get some help if you need it.
Yeah, and I think an important one here is we're having success at the CPA in eliminating some of these barriers. The conversations we're having with insurance have been really positive. We've seen a turnaround in coverage on telehealth from a lot of the major providers. We just saw the PSHCP extend again the suspension of a doctor's referral for public service healthcare workers. So huge props to the advocacy team, because I have absolutely nothing to do with that. But we are, as a CPA and as your association, working on eliminating some of these barriers for you as well.
Amazing. And then something that we heard loud and clear through the research was that your patients understand that your relationship is a long-term relationship, and they don't expect to see those results overnight, and they don't expect to get back to 100%. So this is an opportunity to just remind them of that. Remind them that you're here for them when they are ready. If a lot of people aren't ready to come and see you right away, just remind them that to keep up with their exercises and that your clinic is there for them when they feel safe to do so. The next one, this kind of like section of tips, is all about safety. And so we know, as Chrissy acknowledged, that there's tons of official safety tips that you guys have been given, and we're not going to try to talk about any of those things. We totally understand you guys know what to do. These are just subtle hints and cues and nudges that you can give to consumers for if they make the decision to come to your clinic. How can you ensure the safety of yourself, ensure the safety of your patient, and ensure the safety of others? So the first one is we want you to be in a position where you can give patients subtle hints and clues that you're following these strict sanitizing protocols that have been put into place. So we know that the smells of these chemical disinfectants like bleach and things like that might give people the feeling of being in a hospital. It might be, very intense. It might not be comfortable for people. We can use scents like lemon to kind of signal clean. And then we want you to be able to make people feel safe and comfortable by taking all of these precautions that you've been asked to do. So for example, these sanitizing things, whether it's putting on your PPE, wiping down the bench that they're going to sit on, wiping down the room, to do these things in front of them so they can actually see you doing them and they can feel very safe and know that these things are happening. And then the next one is to nudge your patients into an action that will also protect you. So when we're thinking about nudge theory, it's basically reframing the benefit of what you're asking someone to do to be about others versus themselves in order to get them to do it. So we know that people tend to have self-destructive behaviors. We do it all the time. So if you ask someone to do something like wash their hands for themselves, it's not always as effective as asking them to do something to protect others. So for example, what you can do is ask your patients to sanitize their hands for the safety of their physiotherapist. And we've been following this study that's happened in Denmark closely, where they were able to increase visitor hand disinfecting from 3% to 67% by asking them to focus on the safety of the doctors and the other patients versus that of themselves. So just a way to kind of ensure that the safety of everyone is being looked after. And here I'm going to hand it back over to Ryan to take you through the rest of the tips and to close us off.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. So we spent a lot of time talking about this experience up front that, the research and the consumers have told us that they expect. And, even in the description of this session, we talked about from Lululemons to PPE. And, there's no way around it that experience, the sensory experience from a visual and even as small as Nicole talked is going to change. But we don't think it has to actually fundamentally change the connection you have with your patients if we focus on a few things that you guys do very unique to other disciplines. So firstly, emphasize the amount of time you spend coaching. Nicole talked about it, right? People are going to be coming out of this really weird, disruptive period in time that they've never experienced. Or one of their coaches. So take the time, talk to them, ask the questions. They're going to have tons to share. Be ready for that.
Can I just translate some marketing language?
Yes, go ahead.
Educating your patients, not coaching them.
Yes. The consumer calls it coaching, though. Emphasize the touch. So there's going to be in some provinces, when we were going through the new health and safety regulations, like you're going to be asked to basically scrub in for surgery. There's going to be this barrier that's never been there between you and your patient, but that doesn't eliminate the touch. And we think that's really important, is don't lose that time that you have touching your patient. Make sure that you're taking the time to manually diagnose issues, to really connect with them on that important human level. And reassess your patients. I know this is what you guys do all the time, every time somebody comes in, but I think the recommendation here is to make it more obvious. Explicitly state, hey, we haven't seen you in a few months. Why don't we relook at things? Did anything pop up when you're working from home? Things you already do, but be very deliberate in how you do it and how you communicate to your patient so nothing's left to subtlety. and that they're able to pick up that you're still this educator, you're still teaching them how to connect with their body. And at the end of the day, if there's any concern about how all this is going to impact your practice, just be a physiotherapist. We know the consumers have told us that they love what you do. You are viewed incredibly positive, more positive than any other disciplines that we would compare physiotherapy to. You should have the confidence that if you just stick to therapy is, these new regulations, the changes of COVID-19 aren't going to get in the way of you having a very important connection and impact with your patient. And that's all we have to share. So I don't know if there's any questions or thoughts people want to explore.
Thank you so much, Ryan, Nicole, and Chrissy. If we do have any questions, please don't hesitate to share them in the Q&A chat, as well as you're welcome to reach out afterwards to information@physiotherapy.ca with any additional questions or comments that you may have. I think we're going to bring this session to a close. Please continue to check out the CPA's COVID-19 resource page at physiotherapy.ca/COVID-19 for the latest information on COVID-19 future webinars. I'd like to take this final moment to say thank you to Ryan, Nicole, and Chrissy for participating and sharing this information today. I hope those of you attending found value in the session and can make use of this information. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.